Hello everyone. Today we will be looking at how to set up your system to develop C++ and to set it up in a way that is the right way, I would say. So what we're going to do is we will be setting up a virtual box, installing their Linux for you, because I think Linux is the way you should be going if you plan on developing professional software. And then get all the things you need in the new Linux, and by the end of this video you will be able to run your first C++ program in your newly installed virtual machine. So you need a few things to do this. So I would recommend on downloading here VirtualBox, which is a tool to get your virtual machines up and running. And as the thing that I would recommend in running in the VirtualBox, either use something like Ubuntu, or what I personally like is Kubuntu, because I think it's just offering a nice get and go, and includes already much of the stuff that you might be needing later on. So I think it's a great Linux distribution that you should try out. Anyways, let's get this started. So the things that you need to download VirtualBox. So VirtualBox for your own system. So I'm just assuming you're running Windows, then probably this Windows is the right one. So you want to just install that. And for Kubuntu, probably the same. Just download the latest available image and install that one. If you have done that, if you have started the download, then you can just install your VirtualBox and get it running. I already did that one, so let's have a look at the VirtualBox. So after we have fired up the VirtualBox for the first time, it will probably come up empty. And now what we need to do is to basically create a new one. This is the one that I have already created for testing purpose. So let's walk you through the process. So the first thing that we need here is to hit new. And here usually we want to select this kind of system that we want to run. So in our case, it's Linux, and because I have downloaded Kubuntu, it's something like other Linux, or it might be, depending if you, for instance, want to run Ubuntu, you can just select it here. But I will select here other Linux, and then we give it a name, in this case something like, I don't know, Zen2, and then we go up next. Here we can select now the memory size. So you see I have in total 24 gigabytes of RAM on my system. So I recommend in selecting something that doesn't cripple the rest of your system. So for instance, here now I just go with 4 gigabytes of RAM. I think it's a sensible number, but choose whatever fits you. Just remember that you need some power here finally to compile and run your programs on your virtual machine. And we just press next, and then basically for everything like hard drive, we say, yeah, that's fine. 8 gigabytes, we do this virtually and dynamically allocated, everything's all right. And then here we probably also select something like 20 gigabytes just to have a little bit of leeway in terms of installing the stuff. And then we just create it, right? So what we have now created is basically an empty shell of a Linux. So it's like you now have bought your PC in the store, but there's no operating system on it. So it is supposed to be a Linux, but right now there is basically nothing on it. So what we need to do is go to the settings of this virtual machine and basically install or insert the installation media. We can do that under storage, and here you see the CD drive is empty. So in this CD drive, we now will enter the ISO file that you probably have downloaded of your Linux of your choice. So we select that one, we press OK, and then we're ready to fire it up. So we press start, and then the virtual machine should hopefully boot from the CD we have just installed. And here we see it works. Grub is basically the bootloader of any Linux that you have. And here we go with Kubuntu, and we want to install that. So we press enter, and here we see we already have Kubuntu loading up. And for this one, it will take a while to walk through the installation. In terms of the installation, we will just walk through it probably quite quickly. and do it a little bit of a fast forward. There's nothing exceptional to be said and done here. It's just basically installing the operating system in the way that you want, like selecting keys, selecting keyboard layout and stuff like that. But for the sake of the video, we will just fast forward through that one. So after you have installed now your Linux distribution on your virtual box, it will probably look something like this. However, one problem still remains. If we, for instance, go under View with our screen, we're only able to select something like 800 times 600 as the resolution of our screen. If we plan on working with this, it should, however, have full screen, because otherwise it's not really useful. Now, in order to fix this, we need to install some drivers that are now part of the system that we want to run. Fortunately, VirtualBox already offers these drivers for the guest system. So what we're going to do now, we will enter the CD which contains these drivers into our system, basically by just clicking that one. And we have entered them. So here now the system tells us that we have entered now the drivers, and we're going to just mount and open. Now here we already see basically what is on that one. What we want to have here is VBox Linux editions. Usually this is the ones that you want to install. It's basically containing all the drivers that your Linux should have installed if it runs inside the VirtualBox. However, because we're like not using too much of these file browsers themselves, we want to do programming. That's why we quit this one and fire up our console and use the console to do that. So here we have the console. Now we need to navigate to where we have mounted it right now, which is basically under your own user space. And this is now basically already what we have mounted. So if we look at the files, it is basically all the same files that we have now seen. And what we need now to do is we need to run exactly that one, the VBox Linux editions. So how to do that? So we just use the shell and use VBox Linux editions, right? Yeah, and of course without a typo, so we use that. We need to enter our password just because we needed to use the sudo command because we're changing something with our system. And now it's installing basically the drivers that we need to have to run everything. Depending on how much memory you gave now your system, this might take a while, but for me it's already finished. We now go under View. We are still not able to do that because this is maybe the only time where you really need a restart of your Linux system. So exactly this is what we're going to do now. We will restart. So we just hit restart and we'll restart our virtual box. And now here, after it has finally started, we are able to resize to anything that we actually want to use. So in my case, I use this one, and ta-da, we now have full screen running virtual machine. Since now our virtual machine is properly up and running, we can get the tools that we need to get our first C++ program running. So again, we're going to start up the console and use it to install everything that we need. So we're just making this a little bit nicer, a little bit bigger. And now what we need to do is the first thing that we need to install is basically a compiler that I like. I think Kubuntu already has a compiler installed, but just to get you also into the feeling how it is to install stuff on the fly. So we're gonna get the Clang compiler, which is basically sudo apt-get. Apt-get is the usual tool to install software on Linux. So usually on Linux, it's quite convenient if you have never worked with it, but you should really get in the habit on using apt-get. So we want to install, and the software that we want to install is Clang. So we need to insert a password again. And of course, we want to install everything that is necessary. The nice thing about apt-get is that it has dependency tracking. So if you need something and you don't have the dependencies for it, apt-get will automatically also install all the stuff that is necessary to keep your software running. And basically what it now did, it asked me whether I want to install all of the dependencies, and I just said yes, because without having the dependencies, it won't run. And because I want it to run, I obviously need to install all the dependencies. Regarding the compiler, usually you have the choice between two big ones. One would be GCC and the other would be Clang. I think it's a little bit of a religious thing which one you actually want to use, but I think in terms of quality and in terms of whatever you're using, both are actually fine. A little bit of, as I said, religious stuff on which one you actually want to use. I use Clang for most of my projects, but probably this is also because of my history in the development. So the second thing that we need to is to install a nice editor. And there I'm going to show you a second tool how to install software on Linux systems, which is called Snap. One great editor, in my opinion, is Visual Studio Code, which is basically the free version of Visual Studio, but it runs great across all of your systems, has a nice library of different plugins and a good look and feel, and is customizable to any degree that you really want. So I highly recommend that one. To get it, we will use snap. So basically, again, sudo snap. And now we want to also install, use something that's called classic mode, and use now code. Code is basically the name under which Visual Studio Code is published on Linux. So the tool that we're using here is Snap. This one is a little bit different than the apt-get, because apt-get is usually installing everything completely on your system. So you might now install many of these dependencies, which are then shared between different programs. For Snap, it is a little bit different. Snap packages include all of the dependencies that your software needs to run. So it's basically like a container which has everything already inside and makes this a little bit more robust. So if any of the dependencies then on your systems change, the Snap installation will still run because it has already all the dependencies ingrained to it. However, this comes at the cost of the program then finally being a little bit bigger. But I think for code, this is not really a problem. But this shows the general trend of going to more, let's say, containerized development. So in terms of microservices, in terms of Dockers on virtual machines and stuff like that, you see this more and more in software development that the tools that you want to use, they are provided with all of the dependencies already available and already ingrained into the tools. It's just a little bit of a more carefree way of developing stuff because you can really be sure that this one is working. And on the other way around, if you would be the one who is developing this one, you already have a nice environment where you know your final product will run on. So you do not need it to do as much testing, as much analysis where your final software will be running, because you can easily analyze everything that goes into the dependency tree of your software. So I think it's a nice trend, but I just wanted now to show you these two different things, apt-get like the classic way and Snap, probably the little bit more modern way of doing things. So we need here now to wait a little bit till also Visual Studio Code is installed. Now we have also Visual Studio Code installed and are able to fire this one up. So we go to our programs and just type in there VS Code, and it should be directly available to you. Then we click it and it should just come up. It's has, as I said, a lot of customization options available, but we will only do a few in this video. Probably I'm going to show you a few customization options that I personally like very well later on. But for the time being, there are basically just two things that I want to show you. So under the extensions tab here, we are able to download and review all of the extensions that are available. So the most important one for this one is C++ extensions. So if we go here to C++ or just type C++ in, then most likely we already see like the most important thing. It's the first one here. It's the basically including all of the linters, of the code highlighting, of the IntelliSense stuff that is necessary to autocomplete your code and so on. So I think this is really something that you definitely should have if you plan on working with C++. The second one that I really recommend is using a color theme of your choice. Because colors in the code, they are very important. And if you have probably already a color scheme that you really like and that you're used to, you should keep on using that. For me, it's Material Dark. I really like that one. And that's why I will install also that one, because personally, I really like the contrast and whatever. So after installing it, I will directly also use it. Helps me here. And then we're already available to do whatever we want to do. So we want to create a C++ program, right? So what we're going to do here is we will probably here create a folder under documents where we say, let's say, first program, just call the folder first program, and we're going to use that one. So we have now opened the folder in our Visual Studio Code, and obviously I trust all the authors because I have created it myself, so I guess I can trust myself. And here we have now basically everything that's inside this folder, so there's nothing really inside, but we have this nice workspace now available. What we're gonna do is we create a new file, and we're gonna save this one as the main.cpp, and save it. So Visual Studio Code will automatically see that this one is a C++ program because it has already this this ending of the file, and it immediately shows what code highlighting and everything. And here it also says something like we should get these extensions, but we already installed them in the beginning, right? So we will be going back to the file and just type our first program. So the first program, basically, I mean, like in every language, is just outputting something to the console. So we need to include something that is called IOStream. This is just a standard library which is including all of the stuff that is necessary to get everything that you want to output on console. And then what we need is to have the main routine. Every C++ program has to have a main routine. The main routine returns something that might indicate success or failure of your program depending on the return value, and may take values that are given as command line arguments from your command line. But for the time being, I recommend in just leaving this empty, so this version is also allowed. We won't fail the program all the time, so it will always indicate success to the console. This is why we put here a 0 in the return value. And then what we will do, we output something to the console, which is done by the standard cout operator. And here we just put something like hello friend. And then we're going to end line by standard end line operator. So we save this one, and we have our first C++ program. However, what we still need to do is we need to compile it and run it. Because C++, it's a language that needs to be compiled. In contrast to scripting languages like Python, in C++ you need to compile the program and get an executable which you can then execute. So we're going to do that, and we're going to do that actually completely by hand by using the Clang compiler that we have installed previously. So we use here Clang++, which is the Clang compiler for C++ code, and we want to compile that. So probably what we should do, we should go to this folder first. So we switch here to this folder, which is under Documents, and then it was here under, we created a folder which called First Program, and we just go here, and now we use Clang++, and want to put this one on the main.cpp that we have now just created. And -o is saying how it should be named after it has been processed. So we can just use, for instance, program. And then we hit enter, and it did its magic. So if we now look at all the files that are here, main.cpp has a new companion, which is program. We specified this here as the output name, so we can just use this one and run it. To run it, we just use the / command and then use program and press enter. And here you see already the output of your program. So congratulations, if you made it to this point, you have now created your first C++ program. So hopefully you have learned something today. If you have any suggestions and ideas of what you want to see next, please leave a comment below. Otherwise, I hope you have learned something today, and see you up until next time. Take care.